Greetings builders, I'm back and now with the part 4 of our 12 starter builds for Affliction. Don't forget that you can find the complete guides and POBs for all those amazing starter builds in the video description. Let's start with a true classic, the Essence Drain Occultist with the Witch class. Essence Drain is a skill that drains the life of your enemies and even restores your life by a percentage of the damage dealt. Since it can only be used in one enemy at a time, we also use Contagion to spread the damage, resulting in an amazing increase in clear speed. To read the pros of this build, I would start with how easy it is to play. You just need to cast Contagion and Essence Drain to watch the whole screen of enemies melting before your eyes. This character is also very easy to put together because it doesn't need any mandatory unique item, and above all of that, it's very safe with many defensive layers. Now to list the cons, the first thing that comes to my mind is the boss damage. Even though this is a very cheap build, you need to invest several divine orbs to have a big single target damage. But don't worry too much about that. This build is meant as a red map farmer and it kills map bosses easily even on a low budget. As for budget, this build is very cheap. You can get it destroying early endgame maps with only around 35 chaos. To comfortably advance to yellow maps, you need to invest around 100 chaos, and for easily completing your Atlas I recommend investing around 4 divines, but you can totally do it with less. Don't forget that on PoEbuilds.net you can find a list with all the equipment that you need to buy for this build, with direct links for examples being sold by other players. For clear speed, I'll give this build 10 out of 10. When you get a big area of effect in your Contagion, you kill enemies way beyond your sight with only one cast. The boss damage on the other hand is a 7 out of 10. It will take longer than usual to kill guardians and pinnacle bosses, but you have no problem against regular map bosses. For the survivability, I'll give it 9 out of 10. This build counts with over 100,000 effective HP because of high armor, high evasion, spell suppression, amazing life regeneration, and even a little bit of block chance. Next, we have a super fast and hot one, the Infernal Flicker Strike Ascendant with the Scion class. This build uses the unique sword Auto Sacrifice to sustain the frenzy charges needed for you to keep flickering, but that's not any Auto's flicker build. This one also chills and shocks enemies for a lot more damage, clear speed and survivability. To list the pros of this build, I would of course start with its clear speed. Flicker is just incredibly fast and super cool to play. This build also counts with an amazing boss damage and high survivability. Now, to list the cons, the first thing that comes to my mind is that you're always very close to enemies, which is a vulnerable position. Another issue is that you have little control over your character, making it hard on bosses where you need to mind your position or attack the right enemy. As for budget, I can only estimate it for now, but normally you can get it destroying early endgame maps with only around 90 chaos. To comfortably advance to yellow maps, you need to invest around 150 chaos, and for easily completing your Atlas, I recommend investing around 4 divines. You need 3 mandatory unique items for this build. The first and most important is the Auto Sacrifice sword that allows you to maintain your frenzy charges always up even while flickering. Next, we also need the Call of the Void ring that causes your attacks to chill and shatter enemies. This ring might be a little expensive during the first days of a new league, but don't worry, you'll be fine without it while waiting for the prices to drop. Finally, we also need the Yoke of Suffering amulet that causes all of our damage to be able to shock enemies for a lot more damage. For clear speed, this build is surely a 10 out of 10. As any other flicker build, this one is also insanely fast, so fast that some players can even play without getting nauseous. The boss damage is great and deserves 9 out of 10. This build achieves high amounts of DPS capable of decimating even the big bosses in just seconds. Now for the survivability, I'll only give it 8 out of 10, even though this build still has almost 100,000 effective HP because of high armor, evasion and spell suppression. I had to take 2 points out because they're always very close to enemies. Finally, we have the archer build that gets the most amount of boss damage with low investment, the Vaal Ice Shot Deadeye with the Ranger class. Ice Shot is an awesome archer skill that freezes the whole screen of enemies, granting many explosions. Just as I did with the Lightning Arrow and the Tornado Shot build, the complete guide of this one will also count with 2 versions of this build, a budget and a complete one. Each has its own POB and passive tree, so you can start this build even on a low budget and upgrade it later. To list the pros of this build, I would start with how strong Vaal Ice Shot is. When you use it on bosses, you won't even need your ballistas to obliterate them in less than a second. The clear speed is also outstanding, killing many monsters with only one shot. Now, to list the cons, I would say that this build is not very tanky. Even though you have some defensive layers, it's important to take advantage of your ranged attacks and stay far from danger. If you don't mind your position, you might die. About the budget, you can get it destroying early endgame maps with only around 80 chaos. To comfortably advance to yellow maps, I recommend investing around 150 chaos, and for easily completing your Atlas, I recommend investing around 4 divines. But if you go for the complete version, you need to invest at least 4 more divines. On the budget version, you only need one mandatory unique item for this build, the Yoke of Suffering amulet that causes all of your elemental damage to shock. This way our enemies take a lot more damage. On the complete version, on the other hand, besides the Yoke of Suffering, you also need the Lion Eyes Fall and the Thread of Hope unique jewels. They are expensive but grant a huge boost to your damage. For clear speed, I'll give it 10 out of 10. You fire many projectiles with high attack speed, and those projectiles chain on enemies, bounce off walls and go everywhere, freezing and exploding them. It's just amazing. The boss damage is also great and deserves 10 out of 10. As I said, Vaal Ice Shot is probably the strongest Vaal skill and can destroy bosses easily. Above all, you can also count with your ballistas for a lot more damage. For the survivability, I'll give this build 8 out of 10. Even though you have armor, evasion, spell suppression and can kill enemies from a good distance, this build isn't very tanky. If you don't mind your position, you might die. And that's it for today, guys. Please don't forget to tell me in the comments which build will be your starter. I wish you all an amazing Affliction League, and don't forget to keep building!